Welcome to the English with Kirsty podcast from www.englishwithkirsty.com. Here I'll be sharing with you tips, information and other learning resources so that you can improve your business English. Hello everyone and welcome to episode 44 of the English with Kirsty podcast. And before I start today, I just want to apologise quickly because there was some silence at the end of the last couple of podcasts. It shouldn't have been there, and I've got rid of it now so it won't happen again. But yeah, in case that's annoyed anyone, as it annoyed me when I found it, I'm sorry about that. So today we're going to talk about vocabulary learning and why learning individual words isn't enough. And I don't know how you learn vocabulary. I'm not going to go into all the different ways of doing that because everybody really needs to find what works for them. But often we work with lists or flashcards or things like that, which is good for learning words, particularly nouns, because there's often a direct translation of a noun. But what I'm talking about today is things that you can do to help yourself when you're learning new words. Because often it's not just one isolated word on its own, it's words belong together, and understanding how they fit together to make sentences will help you to make your own sentences and to make better sentences. So the first thing is prepositions, because often words belong together with a preposition. And if you can learn them together, then you will save yourself time because you won't have to go and try and find out what preposition you need. And people complain about prepositions because they're not always obvious. The obvious one that I can think of that came up again yesterday was, why are we on the train or on the plane when we're not on the roof? But it is on the train, on the bus, on the plane, and not in the train, in the bus, in the plane. So things like that. And also the preposition you need is not always the one that you'd expect. So languages don't always follow the same rules in terms of which preposition goes with which. So, for example, in Turkish, you are frightened from something. In English, you're frightened of something. In Turkish, you're married with someone. In English, you're married to them. I actually think married with sounds nicer. It gives the idea that it's that you're a team. But unfortunately, in English, you're married to them. So you can't just assume that the preposition you would need in your own native language is the one that you need in English, because there are differences. So, for example, you can be proud of someone, annoyed with them, or worried about them. So all these things, if you just learn annoyed, I'm annoyed, you can't say I'm annoyed of you. That doesn't make sense. It's got to be I'm annoyed with you, or I'm annoyed about something that you've done. But if you learn these things together, then it will be easy when you need to use them because you know which prepositions follow them. The second thing I wanted to talk about was phrasal verbs, because we do have a lot of them in English, and it's something that I want to look at in more detail in another episode. But just to mention here that if you learn them together, then that will help you, because the verb on its own and the phrasal verbs that are made using that main verb are completely different. So it's good to learn the phrasal verb with the parts of it together, because then that will be easier for you. For example, you can look out of the window, but if you look at something, it's different to looking for something, because if you look at something, you want to see it. If you look for something, you're trying to find it. I'm looking for my keys. Where have I put them? Look after something is different again. You're taking care of something. So these are all based on the word look, but adding these additional words completely changes the meaning of the verb. So it's not just enough to learn look. You can also learn these other look for, look at, look after, and then that will help you to increase your vocabulary. Okay, idioms. Now, we've talked about idioms quite a lot on this podcast, but you really do have to learn them as a set phrase, because otherwise they won't make sense. Somebody asked me when I was planning to write this what "it gets my goat" means, and it just means kind of it annoys me, it really winds me up, makes me angry. But a goat is a farm animal, and normally it's got nothing to do with being angry. It's only in this phrase, and therefore if you're going to learn an idiom, it makes sense to learn the whole thing together as a phrase and learn when it can be used, why it can be used, that kind of thing. And also, don't try to translate idioms unless you've seen something similar in the language that you want to learn, because if you do, it will make no sense. Well, it's possible it will make no sense. I mean, there are some idioms that are common in many languages, but some are specific to one language, and if you try to translate it, even though the words don't make sense, the other person may not know what you're talking about if that idiom doesn't exist in their language. The fourth point that I put in this article, I'll link to the article. It was a guest article for another blog, so I will put a link to that on the show notes page. But the fourth thing I said was about noun genders. If you're learning languages where that's important, it doesn't matter for English, but if you have to learn the gender of the noun, it makes more sense for you to do that at the beginning rather than to have to keep looking up in the dictionary what gender you need. So that's more relevant if you're learning languages like German, Spanish, French, to name a couple, but it doesn't apply to English. Context will help you to remember. So if you can remember why you needed to learn a word, for example, if you have, I have a food allergy to certain products, so if I go to another country, I will learn that word because I know I will need it when I go into a restaurant. I have to say, you know, I can't eat whatever, so that they don't give me something that I can't have. So if there's a practical reason why you can't have something, for example, then that helps me to remember what this word is because I know I'm going to need it. Or sometimes if you have an embarrassing situation, it's not always great, but when you learn a language you do make mistakes sometimes, and that's normal. And yeah, I told my Turkish teacher that I'd given my friends flowers and ice cream to eat, and I meant strawberries and ice cream, and the words are quite similar, and I did feel a bit stupid, but I didn't make that mistake again because I remembered this whole instance with the flowers and ice cream, and I know it helped me to remember both the word for strawberry and the word for flower because I didn't want to do that again. So if there's some kind of experience, or if you're reading something that really interests you, then you will probably remember words because the topic interests you. Or maybe you're a practical learner, so I remember cooking with a friend, and we talked about what we were going to do and how we were going to prepare the ingredients and what the ingredients were and all that kind of thing. And then it helps because I remembered this experience of cooking, and it also helped me to remember the words as well. So I mentioned it earlier in the article, in the podcast as well, but use the words. It's, you know, I used to be really good at learning words for tests at school, and later as a language learner, sometimes there was a vocabulary test, and I was really good at that for the test. But then if someone asked me a couple of weeks later one of these words, I wouldn't necessarily know it because I just committed it to my short-term memory. And if you want to use these words, then they don't need to be in your short-term memory. They need to be something that you can recall easily. So whilst it's good to do vocabulary tests to make sure that you're learning words and to test yourself, also go back to the things that you think you know or try to use them, because the brain can commit information to the short-term memory, and some people are really good at that, but it doesn't mean that you've necessarily learnt the word and that you'll be able to use it again and again. And also be smart about what you want to learn. I know some people don't have a choice if they're learning for an exam or something like that, or if they're studying a specific text as part of schoolwork or a language course. But if you're choosing your own text and you're working on your own learning, then don't waste your time learning words that you're never going to use, because you'll forget them because you're not going to use them, and you won't have opportunities to bring them into everyday conversation. It's like somebody was asking me about phrasal verbs the other day and learning them, and I just said, you really need to think about which ones you're likely to use and make a list of those and learn those first, and you can always add to that list later, but don't just get a dictionary and start at the beginning and try to learn all the words or the phrasal verbs are just, it's not helpful. And also, speaking of the dictionary, another reason why it's really good to learn words in context is because one word can have several meanings. You've maybe had the experience where you look something up in the dictionary and it gives you 5 or 6 options, and do you just take the top one? How do you know which one to take? Because in German, for example, the word, it's the same word for what in English would be heavy or difficult. So you can have heavy shopping bags, that's fine, but you don't have difficult shopping bags, and you don't have a heavy exam, but you can have a difficult exam. In German, it's the same word, but it's not the same in English. So you need to start to look at these words. How do other people use them? Which one do they choose? And then that will help you to know when it's appropriate to use the new word that you found and when not. So I hope that's helpful. Some tips. Basically, yes, do learn as many new words as you can if you think you're going to use them, but also be smart about the words and try to look at how other people use them, how they're used in writing, which prepositions go with them, if they're verbs made of several parts, and how does that verb fit together, all these kind of things, because when you understand the context, it will be easier for you to build your own sentences and speak or write. Okay, so that was the topic for today, and it is based on an article, so I will link to the article as well, which you can find on www.englishwithkirsty.com/podcast/episode 44. And also this month I've launched a new service, so if anyone's interested in that, it's for people with small businesses and people who are producing information in English for their customers, but English isn't their first language. So it's really a proofreading, editing, checking, helping service for people who want to feel more confident that their texts in English are right. So I know when I write text in German, if something's going to go out on an advert, I will get it checked as well by a native speaker. I use German all the time for talking to customers, and that's perfectly fine. But if something's a bit more official, if it's going up on the website maybe, I will take the time to ask a native speaker to check it for me, because there may be things that I've missed, and I really value that. The people who do that for me really help me out. And I know how much better I feel when a native speaker has checked things. So if there are other people who want that same kind of service for English, I'm now offering that service. And I will put the link to that service on the show notes page as well. So www.englishwithkirsty.com/podcast/episode 44. Okay, so I wish everyone a good week, and I'll be back again next week with some information on phrasal verbs. Have fun and enjoy learning English. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the English with Kirsty podcast. If you have any questions or comments, my email address is kirsty@englishwithkirsty.com, or you can go to www.englishwithkirsty.com/podcast, where you'll find information about the individual episodes.